So, will stricter gun laws help curb deaths and murders? We speak to Dr. Jean Redpath of Africa Criminal Justice Reform at the University of the Western Cape. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time this afternoon. Now, what has led to the influx of so many guns in our society?
So South Africa has had a long history of having guns in the country. We have about 3 million legal firearms, and at the latest estimate by the Small Arms Survey, we have about another 3 million illegal firearms. We also border many countries who in the recent past have had violent conflicts, and many firearms come in over our borders illegally. So there are many reasons why we have many firearms circulating in our society, including the fact that probably the vast majority are illegal.
Now, Doc, between 2002 and 2010, the number of people who died as a result of firearm usage had dropped by more than half, and we saw rather an escalation, or just something that remained relatively constant was the death of those with results to the murders of a blunt force, trauma, or stabbing. So there was a huge reduction in that number. Do we know what it was attributed to in that period?
So what we had in around 2000, the new Firearms Control Act was passed, and it came into effect in 2004. But what we also have to remember is that the South African state, the police service, the criminal justice system was operating relatively well over the time period of 2000 to 2010. However, from around 2010, after the 2010 World Cup, we know that South Africa as a whole experienced state capture, and our police service and our criminal justice system was not immune from that. And progressively since 2010, we saw all the indicators for serious violent crime slowly getting worse. And part of the reason for that is a criminal justice system, a police that wasn't functioning as well as it was functioning in the pre-2010 period.
Now, Doc, speaking about the police, how many or how much of the weapons that are in the hands of criminals is because of a result of the losses of arms that are meant to be within the South African police force, and what leads to those losses?
So we do know that something like at least one firearm a day is lost by a police person. I'm not sure of the figures in other official institutions of the state. So it's not only the police that can bear firearms, it's the National Defence Force, it's other law enforcement agencies who are also authorized as official institutions to hold firearms and to sign them out to particular people to use. But we do know that there were something like 100,000 weapons were handed in voluntarily during an amnesty to the South African police in that period soon after the Firearms Control Act was passed. Unfortunately, some 3,000 of these were corruptly sold back to gangs in the Western Cape. And there was a court case, and the people concerned were convicted. But it just shows us that legislation and confiscations by the police don't work if we don't have a functioning police service and we have corruption within our police service.
Doc, I want us to get touch a little later on the legislation and the enforcement of these laws. But before we go there, I just want us to maybe understand the types of guns that South Africans are allowed to get licenses for. Can you just unpack that for us?
Yeah, so an ordinary civilian person, no ordinary civilian person can have a fully automatic weapon. Can get a license for a fully automatic weapon. So yeah, so if in one of the tavern massacres, if the AK-47 was used was a fully automatic weapon, that is clearly not a legal weapon. If you are licensed for self-defense, you also may not have a semi-automatic weapon. So there's a small category of people, sports shooters and hunters, who may possess with a license a semi-automatic weapon. As if we're looking at those, and then of course handguns and shotguns are other categories which may be possessed throughout. There are different rules which apply to official institutions and also to the security industry. And so that the security industry and official institutions are therefore the place where you're most likely to find semi-automatic and automatic weapons.
Sure. So, Doc, then would stricter legislation in South Africa to help reduce the number of related guns help? Or should we rather be looking at how we're enforcing these laws instead of just having them?
Yeah, so for any legislation to work, you need two things. You need voluntary compliance from the public, and then you need enforcement to back up that voluntary compliance. And that's what we did have for a short time period between 2004 and 2010, where we had this combination of people voluntarily complying, handing in their weapons, complying with the rules about how they should keep their firearms, and you also had a relatively well-functioning police service. However, if those things are not in place, and if the state has lost the trust of the citizens, you can pass whatever legislation you like, and it will have very little effect in the system. And also, the process of passing such legislation, stricter legislation, if you want to take guns away from, for example, the security industry or private individuals, is likely to be very fraught and distract from the more important job of rebuilding our police, rebuilding our criminal justice system, so that we can enforce the pretty good laws that we already have.
All right, thank you for your time. That's Dr. Jean Raypath from the Africa Criminal Justice Reform at the University of the Western Cape, talking to us there about whether or not we reducing or rather influencing our stricter laws on gun licenses would help in reducing the crimes that are related to these guns.